We are now live, but I'm walking away. So all those that join, hi, welcome. Okay. Reimagining education for social justice. So if we think a little bit about education, what comes to mind? Like, what are some of the things that come to mind? Just pop. We'll just do like popcorn. Whatever. Whoever feels the inclination to say something, you just pop it out. Pop out your word. What do you think? Education. What do we think?
New ideas.
New ideas. Mm-hmm. What is education? Anybody else?
Space for growing.
Space for growing. What else? What is education? What do we think? What is education?
Inclusive.
What else?
Awareness.
Glossary. I like your word, right? I love it because it's just like one word. One word. What do you mean?
Oh, no. I said foundation for society.
Oh, foundation for society. Okay, I heard you wrong. For those that don't yet know Jalen, he's very philosophical. So sometimes the things he says, they're real deep, and so I have to ask, well, what do you mean by that? You know, he's really like deep conversations. So, okay, foundation for society. Yeah. What else?
Learning new things, yeah. Every day you learn something.
So education, anybody else have any other things?
I think that education sometimes we really like related to school, like as like brick and mortar kind of building institution, like it's an institution, but it doesn't always have to be that. Like it can be in informal learning environments as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are we feeling some concurrent like thoughts around that? It's really powerful you said that because that's actually where my thought was going. That, you know, if we look at the items that we said, so there are new ideas, there's space for growing, they're inclusive, they're building awareness, they're diverse, there's a foundation for society, it's opportunities to learn or learning, the idea of learning. We never once said a physical space. We never once said systems of educations or institutions of education. That never came up. So when we think about education, it really is an experience, right? Rather than a place that we go. And so when we think about reimagining education, it also has to be inclusive of the reality of what education actually is in our country currently, which is a very specific place that you go, the very specific set of value systems as it relates to what you experience in that space. And so in offering some provocation, some thoughts to provoke our thinking around reimagining education, since we have a whole group of really awesome, amazing new folks to get some ideas. I have some quotes from some folks, so I want to read them to you, and then maybe we can think about them. One of them says, "The heart of education as a practice of freedom is to promote growth. It's very much an act of love in that sense of love as something that promotes our spiritual and mental well-being and growth." Bell Hooks. So for those that are not familiar with Bell Hooks, she's like, woo, amazing writer, really incorporating the idea of race and education and freedom, and really thinking about transforming society through that. That's a quote from her. What does anybody have any thoughts that come to you when like just thinking about that quote? Any thoughts resonate with you? Do we think education is a space to practice freedom?
No.
So education is not a space to practice freedom?
No, I don't believe so, not in our country.
Not in our country, yeah. Would or could that be inclusive of education if we were to reimagine it?
Yes.
Do you think it should be included in education if we
freedom and choice, or just
That's a good
kind of
question,
a broad
right?
sense of freedom?
Because it's an open statement, right? We could dissect it and think about, well, what exactly does freedom mean? Freedom in what exactly? That's a good point. All right, I have another one. Education is a social process. Education is growth. Education is not preparation for life, but is life itself. John Dewey. John Dewey. Who's familiar with John Dewey? A couple of us, yes? He's like our forefather of progressive education. Talking about this in the beginning of the 1900s. So not a new idea, very, very old school, if you will. Any thoughts that come to us when we think about that?
For me, a lot of thoughts come with that because I came to this country at the age of 5 from Mexico. We were very poor. So education always meant opportunity. It meant leaving certain things behind to move forward. Education meant a space where I could grow and I could be like my peers and I can be like everybody else if I worked hard enough, or if I really focused our education for my family. Being a first generation immigrant, it's just that, like, so many opportunities and doors that open because knowledge is power. And I think that when I learn new things, it's just like every window was open and door and things like that because I love learning.
I always take notes just to let everyone know because it helps me in my own thinking and reflecting about the space. Okay, I have another one. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. To complete education gives one not only power of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will, therefore, transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but also the accumulated experience of social living. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What do we think about that? Any thoughts that come to us when we think about the statement of education? When we think about MLK's ideas?
There was a word that you said in there that I can't remember what it is right now because it went like out the window.
Yeah.
But as soon as you said it, it made me think of identity. So there's something about education and all that he said that it should help to instill some kind of sense of self-awareness. And we're all free to express whatever that sense of self is with each other, and that's a part of education. Everyone coming together as yourself and sharing yourself with each other and moving forward and being progressive in that.
And just to piggyback off that, yeah, it's like when I hear that, it makes me think about how it's like a breeding ground for developing social responsibility in folks, you know, because if it is a place where people from all kinds of backgrounds are coming together, then there should be some sort of like universal consciousness about like what it, you know, it's just that's the whole point is like when we think about neighborhoods and how they're diced up and people are divided, you know, just like structurally in a city, a school is a place where you're supposed to be able to like be together and like experience each other and then gain that social responsibility.
That was social responsibility. Any other thoughts that come to our minds with that?
I like the inclusion of character within education. I think when we think about education, when we think about learning, we think about kind of those hard skills, that's what it is. And then this idea of hard skills and soft skills, which is, I think, a silly idea because those quote unquote soft skills are so incredibly important for your character, your development as a human being and interacting with other people. And I feel like we make it seem as if those are lesser than skills than like your math and your science when they should be equal. You know, it doesn't mean anything if you got all straight A's in your schools and you have, you know, great GPA if you can't work with other people.
Theme of your value, right? Because I'm having having deja vu because you've said that several times, and like I'm totally on board with you because that is so very important, right? We focus in our current educational system so much on these, you know, compartmentalized ideas of concepts or disciplines, skill sets, without really affording opportunity and time to build one's sense of identity, one's sense of personal motivation and interest, and then what that looks like in a social setting with others who are different.
Well, I think our kids, the environment, the school that they're in, they're not taught to be their self. They're actually pushed to be like one, right? Like even not just with the uniforms, but with in every aspect.
It's like an institution.
Yeah, it's like they're not being allowed to in any way that they start expressing themselves as their individual, they are not, they put back in line. You know, they don't allow any self-expression there.
And I think that what you're sharing is so true for so many people's experiences. For sure, for sure. Any other thoughts? You sparked a lot of thoughts in me. I like want to say a lot more, but I'm like, listen. Any other thoughts that are coming to our mind? Those are like really powerful things. This idea of institutionalization within our current schooling system. In past meetups, this particular space, we've talked about that actually. We've talked about that. Were you with us? Brittany, you might have been. I'm looking in past months, but that whole idea of institutionalization has come up again and again and again, because that is truly a felt reality for so many. Yeah. And I don't want to veer our thoughts too much, but just thinking about the prison industrial system as an institution and really thinking about pipelines and some of the realities and truths that we know about education and the way that it's currently set up.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. I was gonna do something else, but I'm having a inspirational thought. So let's do something else. Let's think a little bit about the idea of some concepts when it relates to. So if we were to think about, we wanted to reimagine education, and we wanted it to be a place to do all the things that we said, right? Do all the things that we said, and in acknowledgement that there's systems in place that provide institutionalization types of things. Fostering a sense of sameness. Let's think about some concepts that are said or used a lot in policy making around education. There's a concept often used called equalness. We want equal access, right? So what does equal access look like? What would it look like in education? What does equality in education look like?
That everyone has the opportunity to learn the same things. That's what I would feel like being more equal.
Okay, so the idea of sameness.
Yeah.
Okay, for sure, for sure. Does anybody have any like differing points of view as it relates to equality, or are we all kind of on the same page? We all feel like equality means sameness.
I think, like I think I've seen this before, like as like a cartoon, and it's kind of like the way that we do it right now is to apply some sort of like baseline sameness, but that's not quite equality if people aren't starting from the same place. So equality is really looking at the individual and saying, where are you starting from, and how can I bring you up to this level of the most privileged student. So for example, like students with special needs or disabilities, like how do we make it like literally their classroom accessible so that they can have the same learning experience as everyone else?
Yeah. What are we thinking about that? What are we thinking about that?
With that, I agree. I believe all students need to be on the same curriculum. Special needs, advanced, like they all need to be on the same curriculum, because me being a student with the IEP and seeing how they did everything, it was kind of like mind blowing. It's like you give us a piece of paper and you have all these documents of what it is that we cannot do. And then here it is, you say, take the SATs. But you never once prepared me for the SATs. So how can I take something that I was never prepared for? Now you're telling me that I can't graduate if I don't meet those scores. So it was like, that right there shuts down a lot of kids, confidence and everything. Is like, the school system is not built for me because I'm not what they say that I am. I can't meet their standards. So I did, when I was in school, I had went back and I spoke with the mayor because I was very upset because I really wanted to graduate. It was Little Rock High School in Little Rock, California. And make a long story short, they wind up changing it. Now they saying kids with IEPs do not have to take the SATs. So that was like, for me, it was a start. But my thing is, like, even now, my daughter, she's in a classroom with someone who has special needs. I believe she has autism. I think we put labels on so many students. And with, what's her, not her, I don't want to say her name, but with the student, her special need is totally different from a kid with with a learning disability. So that, I think, it kind of conflicts, because here you all have kids that's wanting to learn, that's willing to learn, but you have someone that cannot, she can't control herself because she has outbursts, which autism, we know that that's what they do. So it distracts the other children. So I think that's something they kind of need to get a hold to and figure something out, like how can we separate from special needs, learning behavior, and keep them all on the same curriculum where they're all being able to have the opportunity to learn the same curriculum at their own pace.
At their own pace. So we throw in a whole nother layer of complexity, right? At their own pace. All right. We have some ideas about equality. Let's take that word, let's put it to the side for a second and say, what does equity in education look like? Is it different? Is it the same?
Glossary. You're talking about money, like, or funds or things like that, or?
So it's good, right? So you have a smile, Jalen. I want to know if you want something to say. You sure? Okay, you're being quiet today. I know there's lots of more people. Okay, just giving them a hard time. Okay, so equality is really, definition-wise, is around the idea of sameness. We want the same. We want equality. We want the same for everyone. Equity, on the other hand, is envisioning the idea of access based on different people's levels and access to resource.
Like your socioeconomic status.
Perhaps that might be it. Perhaps it might be social factors that are considered risk factors, like race.
Yeah. I see it.
So equity and equality are different, in that equity isn't saying we want the same thing for everyone, because equity acknowledges that not everybody is the same. So equity as a concept is looking at it from a different lens. So there is like a cartoon, we might be thinking of the same one. There's a cartoon image where there is a fence and some boxes. So in the idea of equality, all the children, regardless of how tall they are all in the same size box, right? Because we want the same thing for everyone. But the child that's really tall gets to see over the fence, gets to see whatever they're trying to look at. The children that are smaller, the same size box doesn't work for them. They don't have access to the same information beyond the fence because they don't have the resources individually, Resources doesn't mean that they lack something.
Right.
They're just
Yeah.
coming from a different place. So now that I've given some glossary terms, let's think about that again. What does equity look like in education?
Well, if I'm understanding it correctly, when I was doing the transfer to my daughter's about to go into junior high, they're giving you options to make a transfer to a middle school. And we're like Tustin and Irvine. And it's like the schools in Tustin, they don't have the same, they don't have the same, opportunities or like different programs and stuff that the kids in Irvine are given. So it's like, I don't want to put my daughter in a school in Tustin because their education is not as good as the one that's in Irvine.
Yeah.
So there's no way I'm going to select a school in Tustin, although we're right there with each other. I'm not going to. I don't understand. I mean, that's my understanding of what you're saying, like the equity of it. Like they're getting cheap education, and we're getting like good
Yes.
education. Like that.
Just leave it on here.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to see, are there questions or are people just saying hi?
People are just waving.
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, that could be. That could very well be. What else? Does anybody resonate with Davina's ideas or experience stories?
Yes, my daughter, we moved from Palmdale, California to the Orange County city, and when I checked her in, everything was good, but I noticed that the kids were like already advanced reading chapter books. I'm like, what? Like, so, right? I was like, okay, so I'm speaking with the teacher, and I'm asking her, I'm like, what do you think I should do? Because I was more so worried about her confidence. I'm like, I don't think she's ready to move forward because these kids are way more advanced than she is. The teacher went and talked to me, and she was like, I agree with you holding her back. So that's what I chose to do, which it was a big mistake. But like I said, it's just, I think it's just the status, like the money thing, like, in poverty areas we get the lowest of the lowest, where you have teachers put their feet up. I had experience. My teacher was like, oh, I don't care what you do, just write your name on a piece of paper, you get credit.
But it's like in Palmdale, she's at the top of her class,
At
and
Palmdale,
then come here, it's like
she's
she's
below.
below.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like
So
obviously what they're teaching.
It's totally
Yeah.
different, and like I said, it's not fair, because with my daughter, she's thinking that something's wrong with her when it's not you. It's what they taught you. You were good there, but here they're on a different level. And that's it. And like she was saying, with the kids, the character, the, confidence, all that plays a role. I think they need to focus on that than just the academic. Like focus on the character of the students, because these people growing to become adults.
I agree. I think that cultivating, like we talk about identity, and we're talking about like cultivating in children an identity as a learner and as a student first, because then it makes it easier for them to receive the education that they're getting, whatever the quality, or pursue better education if they know, like they want to learn more and they're excited about it. And I see that with my younger siblings. We moved from Nevada to California, and my little sister had already gone through kindergarten, and then when we came to California, they were like more advanced, or like on a just a completely state by state curriculum, and so we put her in kindergarten again. And so she's like been 18, she's in her senior year of high school now. I'm like, finally, she's growing up. But she's like the oldest person in her class, and it's just that one little year, but she's still, it like profoundly impacted her ability to feel confident. Like she's so nervous about not knowing enough, and she's like, my friends say things, she always jokes, she's like the Joey of her friend group from like the Friends TV show. She's like I'm so stupid, like and I'm like, what are you talking about, you're like 17, like 18. like you still think of yourself as kind of like a not smart person, and that like really makes me sad.
Yeah, that's really difficult. I think for me, like we grew up in South Central LA, so it's just like going to school now. She has a son, and I'm so scared for him. You know, for boys, where we grew up, it's like, yeah, this pipeline, you know, where it's just like you're gonna go to school, and for sure, if you hang out with the wrong crowd or something, you're gonna end up somewhere else. So for us, even as my godson, like, you know, I talked to her, and I'm a preschool teacher now, and I'm just like, we need to get him in my school. Like, I want so much for her son, because growing up for us, like, it was hard for me learning a new language coming to this country, and then that having to be erased. Like, second language acquisition is not a thing in this country. Like, I came here and my language didn't matter. You learn English because that is, you know, equality. We're thinking about this. Everybody speaks English. You speak what everybody else speaks. Your culture's kind of been put on like a back burner. So when I went to Santa Monica, when I went to college, I tell Brittany all the time, I was in complete culture shock, because I was, you know, in my school's predominantly African American and Latino, and then I go to this school and there's white, there's Asian, there's, you know, Middle Eastern, there's people from all over, and I just, you know, I didn't know how to behave or act. And, you know, I'm sitting in a class, and I never forget it. I tell Brittany all the time, this young man looked at me, he said, you know, when I saw you, I wondered about you. I guess maybe my physical appearance, where I might be from. He's like, but when you open your mouth, I knew everything you were about. And because back then I had a little accent, you know, we grew up in inner city, and it's like, hey, what's up, you know? But then I realized, oh, when I'm in this realm, I cannot be my full self, because I'm gonna be judged by it, or for that I'm supposed to somehow be dumber or not know as much as you know about the world because of where I grew up. So I learned really fast to, like, oh, you cannot speak like that in Santa Monica or around these folks. So it was very difficult for me to maneuver in that new area, because I was just like thinking about, who am I? Like, who am I in this space? Like, how am I supposed to behave? How are people judging you based on this individuality that we speak of? You know, when you're little, you feel fine because this is where you are. But when you step out of this bubble into a new space, it's very difficult for us growing in an inner city. And our education system there, and how they prepare you, because I started in like the lowest classes in college, because I had to work my way up to where everybody else was. That was very difficult. But I'm happy that I went through that journey. I needed to learn. Like, while high school didn't really prepare me for much. It's just like I had to work my way up. But it just takes so much longer. And then it discouraged you from finishing school, because people are out in 2 years, where I was out like in 5 years out of a community college. It took a very long time.
Like, a lot of what people are saying just makes me think, like, okay, how? Education in our society, or in America, we talk so highly in these schools that are funded more because of where they're located. It's like critical thinking, but it's still within this box of how do you think more about these things, but not necessarily these things over here. So you've talked a lot about, like, the type of learner that you are, or you know, someone is here and we feel like we're here, and identity. So to me, when you think of education, it's what kind of learner am I, along with how do I fit into this space, right? So with and even talking about competence, even if I don't feel that I'm the brightest crayon in the box, or, you know, the most dynamic person in the room, if I at least have the confidence of knowing how I learn, or how I understand, or how I comprehend, then I know how I can maneuver through this space or within this terrain. But it doesn't seem like there's really a space or a group of people or a school or a system or whatever you want to call it here that teaches you how you learn or how you navigate as an individual, right? So, like, you're talking about siblings. My sister and I are two completely different learners. And my dad has asked now, like, do you remember when you used to say, why can't I just have a brain like Chassis? Like, she's got the math brain, like, everything comes so easy for her. And it wasn't always that way for me. But as adults, she says now, like, soft skills. I wish I had your soft skills.
Yes.
You know, I'm a program manager, and I can do all of these things, and I can execute all of these tasks, but I don't know EI. I don't know emotional. I don't know how to interact with people. And that's not valued in education or in corporate systems or in workplaces, right? So it took me probably until, like, well after college to actually figure out how I learn as an individual. So then you go back and you say, oh man, how much easier would life have been if I knew how I learned? And we talk so much about learning styles, personality types, and blah, 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 blah. But no one talks about it when children are growing, or, you know, when we're coming of age, so that you can put that
use that as a tool in your backpack so that you can progress, you know, so that you
Yeah,
can
the children
succeed.
are actually being penalized for not learning, not being able to learn as everyone else does. They're being taught how to do math problems different ways for just to get to one answer, but you're required to learn each way. Although each way doesn't work for everybody, they're being penalized for not knowing how to do everything that all those different ways. And I think if they focused on the child's learning ability, like how they learn, that this style will be for you because that's how you learn. This style's for you because this is how you understand it. But they're not. They're at our school. They're making them learn everybody's style. Like,
And it's confusing. It's a lot of pressure, especially on the kids. Like my daughter comes home. This is the first year that she has came home and cried. And she loves school. Like in kindergarten, I was so afraid. She was like, I'm like, okay, she's gonna want to stay close to me. I was like, okay, so for her to come home and give me this experience of her crying, and now it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm trying to talk to the teacher, like letting her know you're breaking her down. You know, you're making her feel like as if she's not good enough. I understand where you're coming from. She's not getting it. I told you this. That math does not come easy for her. But it's like, oh, well, she needs to go to tutoring. They're not talking about, in tutoring, they're not talking about the homework that you're giving. It's something totally different. So what am I to do as a mother to make sure I build her confidence and have her to go with her head up high every day to like, it's okay, Mom, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. I'm telling her one thing, but in the classroom, you're telling her another.
yeah, so they're not allowed to use. They're being forced to learn how the teacher's giving. And if you don't learn how the teacher's teaching you, then
You just don't get it.
they want to do tests to see if you have some kind of learning disability rather than how do you learn, you know?
I've said this before, but when I think about equality and equity, I always call it the McDonaldization of education, because you can go to McDonald's here and get what do they have, Whoppers, Big Macs? Whatever thing they have at McDonald's.
Whatever they have there.
You know, get your burger.
Your way.
Your way. You get your burger thing here, and you can go somewhere in like Connecticut and get the same burger, and it's gonna look, taste, and be the exact same. Because they have operationalized the entire system. You do this, you do this, you do this, you get X result. And we do that in our educational system, but we don't realize that people aren't machines. We're living, breathing things that respond differently to different input. And when I think of equality is McDonaldization. Same, you do the same, you get the same out, and if someone is deviant from that, well, that's their problem. That's their problem. If they're not learning the math problem, that's their problem. They're not smart enough, or they have a learning disability, or they have X, Y, Z going on with them. When I think about equity, I think of individualizing education for the child that is walking into this space. You know, I am here to serve you. I am here to make sure that you are learning, that you are growing, that this is a space that you are safe in. You know, like, especially in early childhood, like we do that.
For our kids.
Yeah, we do that because they're so little. We walk in like, this is a safe space. This is your space. I am here to help you learn and grow. And then once you get into the K through 12 system, that just stops. So you've had this support system, you know, whether from like family or if you've been in early childhood, you have that support system, and then you get into like a TK, you get into kindergarten, and that's just not there. And that's such a shock. That's really disorienting for a child to have to go through, and then you're having all of these kind of things that were being forced on them that aren't developmentally appropriate in the first place. So you have, you know, kindergartners who are expected to read, and the kids, we know as educators, is like, it's not developmentally appropriate for a child to be reading to comprehend until they're at least like 7 or 8 years old. These kids are 5 and 6, and we're expecting them to read, to memorize, and some kids can do that, and that's good for them. Cool, nice. And we're keeping that as like the baseline, like, okay, cool, this is our baseline. But not every child can do that. And just because every child can't do that doesn't mean that they are less than. It just means that they're not ready for that material that we're putting in front of them. Or that their learning style is different from the way that we are teaching them. And so from the very inception of this child's educational journey, we're telling them that you're not good enough. And then how is that person supposed to grow and develop?
Well, I think that like the society that we live in is going to kind of like be divergent, so don't let me go too far. But our society is dependent on somebody feeling like they're less than, right? Like this is the foundations of capitalism. Like for me to have all of this, somebody's got to have nothing, or somebody has to have the bare minimum. That's what capitalism is. So when we think about education in America, in a capitalist society, that means that we're training kids, or kids are being trained from the first time you walk in the door of a school, because it's not even every preschool that is doing that individualized learning. I don't think as educators, when you go for that certification, that you're taught to individualize or scaffold. I think that's really challenging to do in a classroom, and I don't think that you're adequately taught or trained how to do that when you're learning the trade. But we're kind of training them from the very beginning to either rise to the occasion, and if you don't, then you're less than. And if you're less than, then I hope you figure it out.
You just get dropped.
Which is really bad. Yeah, like you're not a priority if you're not here where we want you to be, or where everyone else is. So when you think of like, they're not necessary. I think in some cases there is a pinpointing certain groups of people, right? Like, or social or certain socioeconomic groups. We'll say that. But you're doing it from the beginning. You're saying you're not good enough, and then when they get to high school, at the end and graduating and not feeling good enough, then you say, well, why do you think that? You say, well, let's go all the way back to the beginning. So then we have to start saying, well, what do we do? How can we do better almost at conception, right? Like, how do we do better as soon as someone decides they're going to put their child in some type of educational institution, right? How can we do better then? Because if your brain is the most malleable, or the most spongy, from 3 to 5 or from birth to 5, that means, like Brittany is saying, everything after that, you're just piling stuff on top, and it's making more cemented or more concrete the things that you were learning from the beginning.
It's a good segue, what you're saying, because I want us to hold on to this idea of the systems that are in place currently in our current education system are meant to have a specific outcome, which is very representative of what you're sharing. So let's ask one more question. So what does justice look like in education? Is it the same, or is it different than the idea of equality or equity? Is justice different or the same? What do you think?
I think it's different.
Okay. What would it look like?
What does it look like? I think justice looks like acknowledgement. When I was in South Africa, we studied pretty extensively the Truth and Reconciliation Agreement, and explicitly we studied how it existed and what its purpose was, and how it was, the intent to kind of, in a way, make amends for apartheid and what happened. But there was no justice component as a part of that. So it was like, yeah, we that was a bad thing we did, we were wrong. It's like, okay, but now what? So what goes forward now? Like, thank you for acknowledging it. Yeah, it was a shitty thing to do. Great. So where are we going now with this? So I think that in a way, justice is the acknowledgement portion, but also the action portion.
Yeah, like I was gonna say, it's like the historical record, right? Like, where did this begin and why? And we all know it's because like a bunch of rich white dudes wanted to be on top. And that's with like all the systems of oppression in our country. And so we can't just, decide today that we're going to give everyone equity, right? And then be like, let's forget the past 100 years. Because that's not justice. It's not justice to just say, okay, today we're gonna be better. It's like, that acknowledgement and the education of a history that's accurate because that's how we keep from doing it over again.
I think of representation. So I know my story, you know, or someone who's experienced apartheid, they know their story. But as a person who hasn't experienced apartheid, how am I going to adequately speak for someone who has? Right? So in order to make some type of change, you have to have representation within a particular system to actually make a positive change and not a change that seems like a good idea. So I need someone who has that experience to have a voice.
I think justice and equity are two different things, like you guys understand. But I think when it comes to like the practicality of it, I think they're interwoven, because I don't think you can have justice without creating the equity, and I don't think you will be able to create the equity unless there's this mindset of justice. So I think they do depend on each other, especially if we're talking about education in this country. I think justice in education just is creating that equity across these different schools, where we have these low-income schools where the education is dramatically different from schools in high-income areas. And I think justice for me in education is establish the equity so that everyone has equity of opportunity. You know, the outcomes will be the outcomes, but as long as we all have the same starting line, to me that's justice and that's equity.
It's beautiful.
Doesn't speak when he speaks.
Shut down the room.
So I read a really interesting article about these three concepts, which inspired me to bring them forth in this space, to think about them collectively and really digest and pull apart, put back together, what does that look like, what does that mean? So we unpacked equality, the idea of sameness. It sounds like we all agree that utilizing that mindset philosophically isn't necessarily the best recipe for an education system that we feel would be most beneficial to individual experiences. So we're saying equality, that's not something we want to include in educational systems. Equity, we talked about that. We talked about a lot of different things around equity and what does that look like and what could that mean. So we built lots of things. And then we talked about justice. Jalen, you shared that there's an interwoven element that you feel exists. So within this particular article, it's talking about each three, and much of what we've already said about equality was discussed in there. And then it talked about equity in a different way that I had never done before, but it reminded me of a meme that I had seen. Jalen, you shared it with me recently, where it's the same concept, right, with a box and a fence. So equality is same boxes, fence, wooden fence. You can't see, you have to be able to have a box high enough to see over the fence. It's a baseball game. Equity, different sizes of boxes, right? So the really tall kid is gonna have a smaller size box. The really short kid's gonna have a bigger box. And then there's this picture of justice. Everybody has the same size box, but this time, the fence is see-through. It's a mesh fence. So everybody can see through the fence. And in this article, it talked about it similarly through that lens, that justice in education is different than equity. Because in equity, it still has the same outcome. Standardized testing is still the same outcome of value. So then some of the things that you brought up as it relates to what are the rationales around the devising and the development of a set type of curriculum that is manufactured for a certain population. It doesn't matter if you give different size boxes, aka different types of resources. Equity and that type of system isn't justice. And so I sought and resonated on that. And really thought about, okay, justice. Well, what then is justice in education? Because I had for so many years been utilizing this concept of equity, individualizing, but still also recognizing and realizing and working with teachers from all kinds of different grades and ages and hearing about this over and over again, that we can individualize all day, but it still doesn't change at the end of the day that either the type of curriculum, what the subject is, the manner in which it's offered, regardless if you give more resources, you accommodate to different learning styles, different temperamental traits, it still has the same box that is expected of education. So the box of education is the same. In justice, looking at education through justice is a complete dismantling of that idea. That education then instead is inclusive of the types of concepts and experiences that resonate with the individual for the community that they live in and the time in which it's happening. And so it made me really think differently about the idea of education and these concepts. So when we think about reimagining education, thinking more deeply around these words that we use and what are some of the underlying belief systems that we could be communicating when we use the words is a good place to start to think about reimagining education and what that might look like. But I appreciate everybody's contribution, because in this space, while it is meant to be dialogical, it is also meant to help us build ideas for taking action moving forward. And sometimes that might be a spark or a seed here in this space. And it might not be in this space. It might be a seed to be planted to continue to want to have the dialogue moving forward. And that's why this space is meant to be a monthly reoccurring space, so that we can continue to come back together and take what we've experienced through the month or in our past experience and come together again and talk about it. So what is education feeling like and looking like for me right now? And what are some of my thoughts around these concepts that we're exposed to a lot, especially if you are an educator, you feel really passionate about education in general, hearing these words and what they mean. And I know I personally have really thought deeply around some of the things you guys said, specifically around the idea of being cultural shock, feeling a lack of confidence, the idea of identity, and being so immersed in the idea of equity for so long, but still yet even myself feeling the reminiscences of a lack of confidence from my own experience really started giving me food for thought and really thinking about equity. So I wanted to share that with you guys because I thought it was quite interesting. I'm like, maybe I need to rethink the idea of equity a little bit more. Maybe there is something different. But I appreciate what you said, Jalen, because maybe it is thinking about the undertone of the philosophical idea of equity as in individualizing and different levels of needs and resources, but then including that in the idea of justice, so that we are reimagining the idea of what education should look and feel like, which we are all agreeing doesn't exist currently, in our desire to move forward and to create some change.
See, I was understanding equity not to just be talking about resources.
Yeah.
I thought equity also included, these emotional elements, these social elements, these conceptual elements that you guys touched on. But I think in order to, so my conception of equity included that, because like you're saying, you can give the resources, but that's not enough. So I was assuming that it included, these emotional elements and these individual elements as far as personality, because you have to treat every personality in a different way, and every personality requires something different, especially as far as education. So I do agree with you that needs to be included. do think that providing equity will produce will produce outcomes for everyone that is just. I just think, I just didn't want to, I don't want to commit to it because, you know, I just don't know. You know, even if after there is equity, there still could be, I guess, people who, you know, aren't necessarily aligned with justice. That's still a possibility. So that's the only reason why I said outcomes are outcomes. But I do believe that if we have equity, we will get the outcomes that are just.
So are you thinking like the equity is more about the people, the agent, the actors within the space, and then justice is, and I'm just conceptualizing what you could be saying, and then justice is more of the overarching system that's in place to provide these equitable engagements within a school system. Is that what you're thinking? Or different?
Say that again.
You know how I do? I cannot repeat myself. It just flows. Okay, let me rethink, reword. I guess what I'm thinking is, so if equity is our interactions, our behaviors of the way in which we are believing and acting as it relates to access, and it could include all the things you said, right? Access to resources, access to the capacity to find their own temperamental rhythm and it be an included part of an environment, right? That's equity. And then justice is this overarching development of the system, not necessarily the behaviors of actors within that system. Does that make sense? Because I guess in reflecting about the article a little bit more deeply, we can have equity within an unjust system, is basically what it was saying. And I really resonated in that. A lot of what you were sharing was resonating deeply with reminders of what it was speaking of, and I'll share with anybody who's interested. And it was really interesting because it was really talking about, you know, we could provide all these different resources. We can be mindful of, you know, cultivating soft skills and emotional intelligence and all these elements. However, in a system that values you to know these specific things, because whoever said this is what you were supposed to know, isn't necessarily just, because then you go out into the world and, well, here's the world. And so then it's not necessarily just because of some of the things we talked about. There is lack of honesty in educational systems about the truth, the history of marginalization and oppression that exists. And that system of our history, of our past, continues to persist itself. It's a cycle that continues. And so you can have equity within this space without ever acknowledging any of these real things that are happening in life. So then how does that actually prepare people for the real world? Is that what it's intended to do? No. And if you were to ask lots of people and just thinking about what we share here, majority of us would agree that an educational space should be about allowing somebody to cultivate themselves. And that's going to look and feel very different depending on who you are and where you are and the time that it is happening. And so it's interesting to think about it in this different way. You know, reimagining education for social justice. Okay, justice means we have to acknowledge. I felt the same when I was in South Africa, but also when I was in Germany. In Germany, they have public policy that all students have to learn about the Nazi regime and about all the things that happened and the Holocaust. It is like a deep embedded part of their culture that students are constantly being reminded of it. But the one thing that I heard when I was in Germany was that young folks felt like crap. Like, this is me. This is our history. This is me. And there was no inclusion of well, what should we look like in the future? What does a just society look in the future given our past? Now what? It didn't include that. So then feelings of lack of confidence and all the stuff that so many students here in the US feel, they also felt. But yet their system acknowledged the past. And I think about that, I thought about that, like, okay, there's a missing component there. And I think what you're sharing is a valid one around thinking, okay, what now? What next? And that education should be thoughtful around that. Well, if we want justice as a society, if it's valuable and rightful, what should educational spaces look like in mimicking that, or to offer opportunity to explore that, if it's a place for learning and building knowledge?
I really like when you said outcomes, it made me think a lot about like what is the purpose of education in our society now, and the outcome is to make us capitalist, you know, like a workforce. And I feel like that's not what spaces of learning should all be dedicated toward. You know, if we think about outcomes, like it shouldn't all be in this effort to just get a job and have income. Like that's how education's been my entire life. Is like this is so that you can survive. Like it should, like education shouldn't be like a thing that you need to get because like it's gonna help you survive, right? Like it crushes creativity when you think of it like that. Like it's crushes innovation, and it just certainly doesn't let people be themselves. And this is stuff that we were saying. So yeah, I think when we think of justice, like what are just outcomes of education, we have to think about the workforce too, because they're so like linked in our society.
Yeah.
I love what are just systems of education. Maybe that might be a future question when we're talking for future meetups, because that's an important thing, right? To start thinking moving forward, because we can continue to talk about all the things we've experienced that were not just, that diminished our sense of self, or didn't prepare us for the workforce, or X, Y, and Z. Adding. And really thinking about, okay, if we want to reimagine a space, an experience that is really looking to shift that reality, what does that look like? What does that?
In my eyes, I feel it's very simple. I believe if you let kids be kids, if you install great things and don't play with him because he's this, or don't, because if you just allow kids to be kids and love and take care of one another when they're young, I believe that it makes them to be great adults. My sister, she's in college, and I went to one of her sociology classes, and the things that they're talking about, I'm like, you guys are just now learning this? Like, they're in shock, like, oh, that happened, or this is why, and it's like, it took you, like, you're just now finding this out, and it's like, to me, it's like, if you guys would have done this from grade school all the way up into college, they wouldn't have these issues. It's simple, like, because kids, they don't see the difference. They play, they love, they care for one another. It's this, once they get into this education, it's like this, have to do it like this, or don't do this, or don't, it's like,
you're not doing it as
you're
good
not doing
as this other person. Let's
right.
start having
And
competition.
and if they have their peers, work with each other, I believe it can be so beautiful. If you, hey, John, you can help Amber, whatever the case is, you guys, they connect. I think if they can help one, they will be so great. Like, I could just see it out. I'm looking at the kids and I'm like, gosh, like, you guys have it easy, it's good, they're happy. But once they hit a certain age, everything just goes downhill.
It doesn't value cooperation, it values competition.
Exactly.